If you really enjoyed this movie, you might say you loved it. Wait. Or it brought the thunder. Hey, 2-in-1 video. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer release, Thor: Love and Thunder. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content like Marvel reviews on a near-daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about Thor: Love and Thunder. This once again sees Chris Hemsworth reprise his role as Thor, who enlists the help of Valkyrie, Korg, and ex-girlfriend Jane Foster to fight Gorr the God Butcher, who intends to make the gods extinct. Taika Waititi returns to direct this after previously directing Thor Ragnarok, though this time he actually gets to write this as well. And while Ragnarok got to incorporate a lot of his distinct sense of humor due to the fact that a lot of the jokes were improvised, this season left a little more to his own devices, and you can tell he was definitely given a lot of freedom here, as this doubles down on the goofier tone that we got in Ragnarok, which I absolutely loved, and this plays Thor up as more of a superhero comedy, and it feels distinctly like a Taika Waititi movie. And as I've said in previous reviews, this is the general vibe I've liked more for Thor. While I enjoyed his first solo film, and I don't mind The Dark World, while his appearances in the early Avengers films were also good, I think the reinvention of Thor as a much more comedic character has been the better route, as it just gives him more of a personality, it makes him feel more engaging, plus it makes considerably great use of Chris Hemsworth's skills as a comedic actor. And once again, Hemsworth just looks like he's having an absolute blast with this role. His sense of timing is always on point. I especially like his deadpan line delivery and the way he'll so nonchalantly say something that's weightier than he perceives it to be. And I loved how the film still played into Thor's headstrong and sometimes arrogant nature, as it made for some fun exchanges when he does something to maybe boost his own ego while being oblivious to everyone rolling their eyes at him, or something along those lines. Now, some have seen this as a dumbing down of the character, like it took the absolute goofiest elements we've ever gotten of the character before and just put them front and center here. And I can see where that criticism comes from, as this plays situations considerably more for jokes this time around. Now, I mean, Ragnarok injected a lot of humor into nearly every scene itself, but this definitely feels like it went in even more on that, and it did so in a way where it can feel very gag-heavy at times, and it can just feel silly. Like, for example, one scene early on where Thor is riding his hammer around like a witch's broom when he needs to go fight. And I'll have to admit, the jokes this time around weren't quite as consistently good as they were in Ragnarok. Not that I want to turn this video into a comparison or anything, but yeah, a few of them did fall a little flat for me here, or it felt like they were trying a bit too hard. However, that being said, I'd still say the jokes hit for me considerably more here than they missed. And despite my being a little more critical of this, I still had a blast with this, even if I didn't like it nearly on the same level as Ragnarok. Though I think your enjoyment of this is going to come down to how you approach this. If you're a diehard MCU fanatic, or you read the original comic book runs this was based on, or you're a huge fan of the Thor mythology and you're looking for all this lore to be established and expanded upon, then yeah, I think you're going to be disappointed, and those are generally the audiences I've seen be the most critical of this. And I get where that's coming from. If you're a big fan of the character in the comics and you see this movie not expand on his lore quite as much as you'd hoped, I can see where that disappointment comes from, and I think that's why a lot of people want to see Thor go back to being a more serious character in the vein of his first two solo movies. Though as for me, while I actually do like the MCU as a whole, I'm also not such a die-hard fan of all this lore and mythology to the point where I feel every movie needs to be so weighty and consequential, and it's gotta hit me on such a profound level, and it needs to open this world up in such earth-shattering ways every single time. I've said this before, but the advantage of the MCU expanding the way it has is that it allows this universe to go in so many different directions in terms of genres and styles it tackles, from the political thriller aspects of The Winter Soldier, to the cosmic space adventure of Guardians of the Galaxy, to a martial arts action movie like Shang-Chi, and so on and so forth. So I'm also fine if we just get some of these movies that are meant to just be a good time and nothing more, and that's kind of what these Taika Waititi Thor movies have been to me, even though, to be clear, both of them still definitely contain more emotional storylines within them. They're not completely void of any emotional depth whatsoever, but they are meant primarily to be these fun, goofy superhero comedies, and because of how well the comedic aspects land for me personally, that's why I enjoy them. Now, that doesn't mean these movies are perfect, and we'll get into some of this movie's other flaws in a moment, but because I do appreciate getting these movies that are just meant to be a good time and not hit on such a hugely profound level or feel like this event, and because I like Waititi's brand of humor where it can just feel so rapid fire, I had a good time with this, and I won't mind that it's not the next most earth-shattering consequential movie out there. I don't think every single one of these MCU movies and shows need to feel that way, especially given the fact we're getting so much in terms of content these days, and you could just have some more contained stories. Now, some other things regarding this humor, there is a running gag revolving around these screaming goats who guide Thor's vessel that some might find obnoxious, though I thought they were a highlight of the movie, to be honest, as they were used just the right amount of times, and I got a lot of good laughs out of them. Plus, Taika Waititi himself also once again appears as Korg, and he narrates a lot of the movie here, including recapping the events of the first three movies, and I appreciated his nonchalant delivery in the way he recounts certain huge plot points, similar to how Thor himself can be at times, so that was nice. That seems to be a big staple when it comes to Waititi's brand of humor, and for me, I think it's really funny, but if you're not a big fan of that, you might find it a little grating. Plus, you also have Russell Crowe here as Zeus, in what's kind of a glorified cameo. You do see him in the trailers, though he's not in the movie for as long as you think he'd be. But he plays the role in a very campy way, with over-the-top line deliveries and body gestures, which, given the tone of the rest of the movie, makes him a really nice fit, and he especially goes well with Waititi's sense of humor, so I got a good few laughs out of him. And the Guardians of the Galaxy are also featured here, as we did see Thor leave with them at the end of Avengers Endgame. Now, they're not in the movie for as long as I was hoping they'd be. They do get in a few good moments in the brief time we see them towards the beginning, but truthfully, I was a little disappointed that, despite this not being their movie, that we didn't get more of them. I mean, Star-Lord's competitive nature with Thor was a highlight of Avengers Infinity War, as was the friendship that forms between Thor, Rocket, and Groot. And I'm not saying that Thor needs to be a permanent member of this team or anything like that, but given that such a fun pairing was established in both Infinity War and Endgame, where it was implied we'd see more of this, it would have been nice to have at least gotten a movie or a limited series or something that gets to explore that dynamic even further. It was a little weird for me to see them set this team up at the end of Endgame and then not really capitalize on such a fun crossover in future projects. I was hoping that this would have been that movie, or one of those projects in particular where we explored more of that. So it was cool to see them, and it was fun in the limited time they were on screen, but it did feel like a big missed opportunity there. Also, Tessa Thompson is once again back as Valkyrie, and she continues to be a highlight of this franchise for me. We get to see Valkyrie now as the ruler of New Asgard, and she actually leads most of the journey that she, Thor, Korg, and Jane go on. Now, there were some criticisms saying that we don't see much of her either. I do think towards the end that's a bit of the case, but I mean, she has a pretty substantial role all throughout this, and once again, Thompson seemed like she was having a blast with the role. She's both incredibly charismatic and badass, and the way she'll put Thor in his place at times was fun, and she has a number of nice standout moments. So I'd say she's in it considerably more than some people made it out to be, and I had a good time anytime we saw her, and I hope we see more of her within the MCU as a whole. Now, from a visual standpoint, once again, this is another visually striking entry in the MCU with an incredibly bright color palette and a lot of distinct imagery. Now, yes, there is some shoddy CGI here and there that it's especially been something pointed out a lot online to the point of aggravation, and I don't disagree that there were some scenes that looked a little off. But that's the exception and not the rule. I thought the way this looked for the most part was really nice, and it fit the fun, mostly lighthearted tone that the film mostly goes for. But as I said earlier on, there are definitely some more emotional standpoints in this story, and they come in the form of two different characters. One is the return of Jane Foster, played again by Natalie Portman, who now goes by the Mighty Thor after Thor's old hammer Mjolnir finds her and she gains Thor's powers, and the other is through our movie's villain, Gorr the God Butcher, played by Christian Bale. Now, while not necessarily the primary tone of the film, we still get these fairly weighty moments with great emotional impact, and that's through the storylines explored with both these characters. With Jane, who is absent from Ragnarok, we find out she has terminal cancer, and Mjolnir finds her as we see Thor unknowingly put this charm on the hammer to make sure it always protects Jane, which causes her to be able to wield it in her time of need. And I thought the storyline was really well done. This is easily the best Natalie Portman's been as Jane. Now, her performances in the first two Thor movies was good, but I felt the writing for Jane didn't really allow for her to do much with the role outside of just be by Thor's side. So not only does this allow her to actually get in on the action, fighting alongside Thor, but this also allows the film to expand on Thor and Jane's relationship, which includes filling in the missing gaps that we didn't see of them in a fully functioning relationship between the Dark World and Ragnarok, which eventually goes downhill and leads to their breakup. And it gives this relationship a lot more meaning than we ever saw in either Thor or the Dark World. So I thought the way this was handled was all really well done, and it added a nice tonal balance to the sillier material, giving this some much needed emotional weight, and in a way where it doesn't feel jarring in the shift between comedic and serious storylines, as we even see Jane make some jokes herself throughout this. There were times that tonal shift could be a little off-putting, but for the most part, I thought it was fine. I also found there to be a nice message thrown in there regarding Jane's fight with cancer, especially due to this one plot point later on that I won't reveal due to spoilers. But basically, I thought the way the film approached this story, it basically says how those who go through cancer or any other horrible, life-threatening illnesses are warriors themselves for what they have to go through and what they have to fight through. And this acts as a way to commemorate those who have gone through something so horrible and debilitating. I thought it was all handled in a very respectful way, and not only does it work as a nice message, but it also adds much more depth to Jane than ever before, with Natalie Portman doing an excellent job as the character. As for Gorr the God Butcher, Christian Bale is also excellent, and along with Portman gives one of the film's best performances, and he actually bucks a trend that we see a little too often within the MCU regarding their villains. It's well known at this point how weak the writing can feel when it comes to MCU villains, who tend to either just be carbon copies of the hero or generic baddies void of a personality. It's gotten considerably better in recent years, though they still do run into that problem depending on the project. But I think Gorr is one of those villains who's considerably more nuanced here, as we see he's someone who starts off as a good person, as he's just looking for help for his sick daughter. We see he heavily worships these gods who he's been told all of his life would be there for him, only for him to see that when he meets one face to face, this god couldn't care any less about him, and that crushes him, as everything he knew and was used to all of his life turns out to be a lie, and once he's corrupted by this object known as the Necrosword, that's what sets him out on this path of revenge. We all see this in the film's opening sequence, and even in just this one sequence alone, there's so much more complexity to Gorr there than we see in some villains within their entire appearances in one movie. And whenever we see this character pop up throughout this, he really was menacing, and you feel the stakes vastly increase. This is someone whose vendetta is personal. This is someone whose whole life was shattered in just one moment, and now he's channeling that to something much more evil. So you understand immediately what's going on in this guy's head, so you feel just how heavy the situation is whenever we see him. And Bale's performance adds a nice layer of tragedy into the mix to balance out that menacing nature, making for a complex, nuanced villain. The only thing with this is the fact that it does feel like we can go stretches of time without seeing him, which is one of my only other big criticisms of the movie. When he's there, it's great, but there were long periods of time where it felt like he was relegated to the background, and not even in a way where it felt like he was still this looming presence hanging over the film. I mean, sure, you have our protagonist setting out to fight him, and that's the journey they're on all through the film, but even while on this journey, the character still felt like something of an afterthought if we didn't actually see him. I'm not saying the film obviously needs to dedicate every waking moment to discussing just how bad this guy is, but it's as if the rest of the characters just kind of forget about him from time to time. It just doesn't always seem like some of the characters put much of a thought into what kind of a threat this guy truly is or anything like that, at least not until they actually see him. So I think in that way, that's where some of those tonal inconsistencies really come into place. And I think if we just got a little more exploring that, it would have made his impact feel even greater. Not that we don't feel it at all, but like, it would have just been nice to actually see Gorr in action much more earlier on, or at least more than just with one god, so that you feel even more how much of a threat he is. Or it would have been nice to see him have more face-to-face encounters with the protagonist earlier on, because at times, for the way he gets displaced to the background, he feels like something akin to a boss waiting at the end of a video game level, just patiently waiting to fight the protagonist. I would have liked him to do a little more. And while he was still an ultimately well-written character, and like I said, Christian Bale himself was great, it did feel like he was underutilized a bit. He still made enough of an impact that it didn't like derail the movie for me, and overall I had a really good time with it, but I think had the film fixed this, it could have had potentially even be maybe top tier MCU. Thor Love and Thunder might not be quite on the same level as Thor Ragnarok, but it's still a fun time overall, making for a very enjoyable superhero comedy. While not all of its jokes land and it doesn't fully utilize such a great villain in Christian Bale as Gorr the God Butcher, it still hits a lot more than it misses. The jokes are mostly great. There's a nice emotional storyline with Jane Foster, with Natalie Portman being at her best as this character. It's visually striking, and it once again acts as another great outing for Chris Hemsworth as the titular character. I had a great time with it, and I hope Taika Waititi directs more of these films. Thor: Love and Thunder gets an 8 out of 10. Now that I've finally reviewed all 4 Thor movies, stay tuned as I'll soon have a ranking of all 4 movies. But in the meantime, let me know, did you see Thor: Love and Thunder, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like this as much as Ragnarok? Do you want to see Taika Waititi continue directing these movies? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it. And for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and keep having fun with film.